Hello Raiders, this is Ezra and welcome to my Bastion. It is October the 4th, 2022 and the first day of the Maranix fusion. For those of us that have been playing for a long time, you're used to the traditional fusion, for lack of a better term. This is how it used to always be. It's been a little bit less common since they introduced fragment fusions, but I want to talk about this in a little bit because, quite frankly, I'm a bit annoyed at the fusion requirements. Specifically, clicking down into the champion training event, once the screen draws, it's 9,300 champion training points to get a rare that is required for the fusion. This really is a level of work and dedication, for lack of a better term, that has not previously been seen for a fusion. Now, I keep track of all of the fusions that I do. I don't think I keep track of the ones that I don't do, but let me flip over a second to my fusion tracker and we'll talk about this 9,300 points and where it is in terms of other. Here we are in my fusion tracker where I took the calendar that Raid published and just moved into a spreadsheet because it's easier for me to keep track of that way. And we'll notice here that we got 9,300 points for the champion training event to get the rare that's required for the fusion. Now, to come anywhere even close to that, I have to go back to the Under Priest Brogni fusion. And for those of you who weren't in the game then, Brogni was an interesting fusion from the perspective of it was a combination where you had to get fragments in order to summon the epics. And then you would do the epics much in the way the current fusion is, where you have to level them up and ascend them, and then fuse those epics into the legendary. Now at that point, it was 12,750 points to get 20 Skimfos fragments. Basically, you had to get that in order to get the epic in order to fuse Under Priest Brogni. And if you all either have Under Priest Brogni or are paying attention to other content creators' videos, he is an awesome champion and well worth it and usable in lots and lots of content. But drilling down into some of the lower point totals for the champion training event, we get a slightly different story. And that story is we got fragments at 2,500 points, 4,150 points, 7,300 points, and then again at the 12,750, which was required for Skimfos. Now, I sat through the Brogni fusion and did it. I also made an agreement with myself at that time is that I would never do another fusion where I had to spend that much time in seat just clicking things. Like, it was borderline obscene how much time and effort it took me to get the 12,000 points of champion training. And so this brings me now to our current fusion and talk about how we might approach this and avoid the same pitfall. And then so clicking back to the Maranix tab in my spreadsheet, the one way out of this we have is that you can get a Tomo from the Summon Rush event. And that is my plan, is that you can either get all 16 prosecutors and fuse them into 4 Tomos and fuse them into the legendary, or you can get 12 prosecutors and 1 Tomo, assuming that you have the shards to spend with the Summon Rush event, and avoid some other hassles. So that is my plan for the fusion, and I'm going to avoid the champion training event altogether. So I hit this with a strike through just to make it look different, which also means that I can identify up to 3 other events or tournaments I'm not going to do because, keeping the prosecutor doesn't seem to be a game-changing item for any but the most early of accounts. So my plan going in then is to avoid the champion training event as well as the champion training tournament, and I will hit that to strike through right now just so we can set that apart. And this really leaves me with 2 more tournaments or events that I cannot participate in and still get the fusion. So from my perspective, the obvious candidates here are the other Dungeon Divers events. Like, I actually find it to be difficult to complete those events just from the perspective of you don't get as many points per artifact during a Dungeon Divers event as you do during one of the dungeon tournaments, as well as the point totals tend to be high. So I think the end state of my fusion is going to end up looking like this. So you'll notice I'm probably going to avoid the Dungeon Divers 2 event and the Dungeon Divers 3 event. Now, part of this is because I have real-world commitments around the 11th and 13th of October, so I'm trying to minimize how much time I have, on the screen during that day. The other is I really legitimately feel that the Dungeon Divers events are more difficult. So if you're going to not participate in some of the events, they're the ones to avoid. I will need to do the first Dungeon Divers event, but that seems to be a reasonable event to complete, given both that the Dragon tournament happens as well as the Ice Golem tournament, and then you can fill out with other dungeons as necessary. And that also makes a big assumption that we're staying on or about 2,250 points, which is the new normal for the dungeon tournaments. If the Spider tournament or the Fire Knight tournament or even the Ice Golem tournament has way higher point requirements than 2,250, I may reevaluate whether or not I don't do one of those tournaments, instead pick up one of the 2 Dungeon Divers events. Should that happen, I will probably publish a new video that updates the plan and let everyone know what I'm doing. The goal here was to provide an alternate fusion approach for people like me that find 9,350 points for the champion training tournament to be ridiculous. And hopefully this works for everyone. Now, the one caveat is it assumes that you have enough shards for the Summon Rush event to get the epic. And that is probably going to be on the order of 7 to 9 sacred shards. I personally have that. At kind of the point where my account is, I only really pull shards during fusions or the rare occasion where there is a guaranteed legendary event that I want to get. That said, I did pull some shards last weekend. That was just during a Void 2X because I knew I would get a legendary. And it worked out for me, so you can check out that video also on my channel. But overall, I don't pull shards very often. I find once you have a relatively advanced account and are hitting Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss on a regular basis, my ability to get shards and get champions is higher than my ability to level up champions to 6-star using food in the campaign. So I don't necessarily need more champions. I need more level 60s on my account. So I'm going to go back to the client real fast and do a quick ending and then leave a few other words of advice. And here we are back at the Maranix Fusion page in the summoning portal. This used to be the only way one got legendary fusions, and I think for a long time that people got used to this. But there's two different factors at play here. Number one, I think Plarium has been consistently increasing the difficulty of doing a fusion, which that seems counterproductive, especially for newer accounts or people who aren't as far along in the game. Like, continuing to make it more difficult to get these fusions seems to be an impediment to progress, not an enabler. The other thing is, when you look at Maranix's kit, it's largely built around hexes. She'll ignore unkillable and shield if they're under hex. She places hex and decreased defense, and hits more if your target is under hex. Hex, in my opinion, is one of those debuffs, much like hit point burn, that Plarium is trying to make more important in the game, more applicable everywhere. I think because of that, it might be good to get Maranix, especially if you either don't have Ruel, the Huntmaster, who hits very, very hard, or if you need someone to set up Ruel, if you don't have another hex person that can place both the hex and the decreased defense, like Mithrala. So I'm going to try to get her, assuming that the point requirements for any of the other events have not been increased ridiculously to make it effectively more trouble than it's worth, and then I'll work on pulling her from shards. But I do think she's a good possible benefit to everyone's account, especially if you build an arena team around hexing, or for the Hydra, especially with the Head of Torment that you can't easily target if you don't have a hex on. So I think she has two good uses in the game, and I'm going to try to get her just for those reasons, but it remains to be seen how the rest of Fusion will go. So I just want to say that, you know, this is my plan for the Fusion to avoid the difficult parts. Hopefully it will help all of you out there. Drop a comment. Let me know if you thought this insight, you know, made you rethink your approach to the Fusion, or maybe enabled you to get it if you wouldn't have done it otherwise. Thanks for your time. This is Ezron signing.